Hello, Cardinals, and welcome to our next installment of Oryx and Crake. To Bonfire. Once upon a time, Snowman wasn't Snowman. Instead, he was Jimmy. He'd been a good boy then. Jimmy's earliest complete memory was of a huge bonfire. He must have been 5, maybe 6. He was wearing red rubber boots with a smiling duck's face on each toe. He remembers that because after seeing the bonfire, he had to walk through a pan of disinfectant in those boots. They'd said the disinfectant was poisonous and he shouldn't splash. And then he was worried that the poison would get into the eyes of the ducks and hurt them. He'd been told the ducks were only like pictures, they weren't real and had no feelings, but he didn't quite believe it. So let's say 5.5, thinks Snowman. That's about right. The month could have been October or else November. The leaves still turned color then, and they were orange and red. It was muddy underfoot. He must have been standing in a field, and it was drizzling. The bonfire was an enormous pile of cows and sheep and pigs. Their legs stuck out stiff and straight. Gasoline had been poured onto them. The flames shot up and out, yellow and white and red and orange, and the smell of charred flesh filled the air. It was like the barbecue in the backyard when his father cooked things, but a lot stronger, and mixed in with it was the gas station smell and the odor of burning hair. Jimmy knew what burning hair smelled like because he'd cut off some of his own hair with the manicure scissors and set fire to it with his mother's cigarette lighter. The hair had frizzled up, squiggling like a clutch of tiny black worms, so he'd cut off some more and done it again. By the time he was caught, his hair was ragged all along the front. When accused, he said it was an experiment. His father had laughed then, but his mother hadn't. At least, his father said, Jimmy had the good sense to cut the hair off before torching it. His mother said it was lucky he hadn't burnt the house down. Then they'd had an argument about the cigarette lighter, which wouldn't have been there, said his father, if his mother didn't smoke. His mother said that all children were arsonists at heart, and if not for the lighter, he'd have used matches. Once the fight got going, Jimmy felt relieved because he'd known then that he wouldn't be punished. All he had to do was say nothing, and pretty soon they'd forget why they'd started arguing in the first place. But he also felt guilty, because look what he'd made them do. He knew it would end with the door being slammed. He scrunched down lower and lower in his chair with the words whizzing back and forth over his head, and finally there was a bang of the door, his mother this time, and the wind that came with it. There was always a wind when the door got slammed, a small puff, woof, right in his ears. Never mind, old buddy, said his father. Women always get hot under the collar. She'll cool down. Let's have some ice cream. So that's what they did. They had raspberry ripple in the cereal bowls with the blue and red birds on them that were handmade in Mexico, so you shouldn't put them in the dishwasher. And Jimmy ate his all up to show his father that everything was okay. Women and what went on under their collars, hotness and coldness coming and going in the strange, musky, flowery, variable weather country inside their clothes. Mysterious, important, uncontrollable. That was his father's take on things. But men's body temperatures were never dealt with. They were never even mentioned, not when he was little, except when his dad said chill out. Why weren't they? Why nothing about the hot collars of men, those smooth, sharp-edged collars with their dark, sulphurous, bristling undersides? He could have used a few theories on that. The next day, his father took him to a haircut place where there was a picture of a pretty girl in the window with pouty lips and a black t-shirt pulled down off one shoulder, glaring out through smudgy charcoal eyes with a mean stare and her hair standing up stiff like quills. Inside, there was hair all over the tiled floor, in clumps and wisps. They were sweeping it up with a push broom. First, Jimmy had a black cape put on him, only it was more like a bib, and Jimmy didn't want that because it was babyish. The haircut man laughed and said it wasn't a bib because who ever heard of a baby with a black bib on? So it was okay. And then Jimmy got short all over cut to even out the ragged places, which maybe was what he'd wanted in the first place, shorter hair. And then he had stuff out of a jar put on to make it spiky, and it smelled like orange peels. He smiled at himself in the mirror and then scowled, thrusting down his eyebrows. Tough guy, said the haircut man, nodding at Jimmy's father. What a tiger. He whisked Jimmy's cut-off hair onto the floor with all the other hair, and then removed the black cape with a flourish and at the bonfire, Jimmy was anxious about the animals because they were being burned, and surely that would hurt them. No, his father told them the animals were dead. They were like steaks and sausages, only they still had their skins on. And their heads, thought Jimmy. Steaks didn't have heads. The heads made a difference. He thought he could see the animals looking at him reproachfully out of their burning eyes. In some way, all of this, the bonfire, the charred smell, but most of all the lit-up, suffering animals was his fault because he'd done nothing to rescue them. At the same time, he found the bonfire a beautiful sight, luminous like a Christmas tree, but a Christmas tree on fire. He hoped there might be an explosion as on television. Jimmy's father was beside him, holding onto his hand. "Lift me up," said Jimmy. His father assumed he wanted to be comforted, which he did, and picked him up and hugged him. But also, Jimmy wanted to see better. "This is where it ends up," said Jimmy's father, not to Jimmy, but to a man standing with them. "Once things get going." Jimmy's father sounded angry, and so did the man when he answered. "They say it was brought in on purpose." "I wouldn't be surprised," said Jimmy's father. "Can I have one of the cow horns?" said Jimmy. He didn't see why they should be wasted. He wanted to ask for 2, but that might be pushing it. "No," said his father. "Not this time, old buddy." He patted Jimmy's leg. "Drive up the prices," said the man. "Make a killing on their own stuff that way." "It's a killing, all right," said Jimmy's father in a disgusted tone. "But it could have been just a nut bar. Some cult thing. You never know." "Why not?" said Jimmy. Nobody else wanted the horns, but this time his father ignored him. "The question is, how did they do it?" he said. "I thought our people had us sealed up as tight as a drum." "I thought they did too. We fork out enough. What were the guys doing? They're not paid to sleep." "It could have been bribery," said Jimmy's father. "They'll check out the bank transfers, though you'd have to be pretty dumb to stick that kind of money into a bank. Anyway, heads will roll." "Fine-tooth comb, and I wouldn't want to be them," said the man. "Who comes in from outside?" "Guys who repair things, delivery vans. They should bring all that in-house." "I hear that's the plan," said his father. "This bug is something new. We've got the bioprint." "Two can play at that game," said the man. "Any number can play," said Jimmy's father. "Why were the cows and sheep on fire?" Jimmy asked his father the next day. They were having breakfast, all 3 of them together, so it must have been a Sunday. That was the day when his mother and father were both there at breakfast. Jimmy's father was on his 2nd cup of coffee. While he drank it, he was making notes on a page covered with numbers. "They had to be burned," he said, "to keep it from spreading." He didn't look up. He was fooling with his pocket calculator, jotting with his pencil. "What from spreading?" "The disease." "What's a disease?" "A disease is like when you have a cough," said his mother. "If I have a cough, will I be burned up?" "Most likely," said his father, turning over the page. Jimmy was frightened by this because he'd had a cough the week before. He might get another one at any moment. Already there was something sticking in his throat, and he could see his hair on fire, not just a strand or 2 on the saucer, but all of it, still attached to his head. He didn't want to be put in a heap with the cows and pigs. He began to cry. "How many times do I have to tell you?" said his mother. "He's too young." "Daddy's a monster once again," said Jimmy's father. "It was a joke, pal. You know, joke, ha-ha." "He doesn't understand those kinds of jokes." "Sure he does, don't you, Jimmy?" "Yes," said Jimmy, sniffling. "Leave Daddy alone," said his mother. "Daddy's thinking. That's what they pay him for. He doesn't have time for you right now." His father threw down the pencil. "Cripes, can't you give it a rest?" His mother stuck her cigarette into her half-empty coffee cup. "Come on, Jimmy, let's go for a walk." She hauled Jimmy up by one wrist, closed the back door with exaggerated care behind them. She didn't even put their coats on. No coats, no hats. She was in her dressing gown and slippers. The sky was gray, the wind chilly. She walked head down, her hair blowing. Around the house they went, over the soggy lawn at a double-quick pace, hand in hand. Jimmy felt he was being dragged through deep water by something with an iron claw. He felt buffeted, as if everything was about to be wrenched apart and whirled away. At the same time, he felt exhilarated. He watched his mother's slippers. Already they were stained with damp earth. He'd get in big trouble if he did that to his own slippers. They slowed down and then stopped. And then his mother was talking to him in a quiet, nice lady TV teacher voice that meant she was furious. A disease, she said, was invisible because it was so small. It could fly through the air or hide in the water or on your little boy's dirty fingers, which was why you shouldn't stick your fingers up your nose and then put them into your mouth, and why you should always wash your hands after you went to the bathroom, and why you shouldn't wipe. I know, said Jimmy. Can I go inside? I'm cold. His mother acted as if she hadn't heard him. A disease, she continued in that calm, stretched voice. A disease got into you and changed things inside of you. It rearranged you cell by cell, and that made the cells sick. And since you were all made up of tiny cells working together to make sure you stayed alive, and if enough of the cells got sick, then you... I could get a cough, said Jimmy. I could get a cough right now, and he made a coughing sound. Oh, never mind, said his mother. She often tried to explain things to him and then got discouraged. These were the worst moments for both of them. He resisted her. He pretended he didn't understand even when he did. He acted stupid, but he didn't want her to give up on him. He wanted her to be brave, to try her best with him, to hammer away at the wall he'd put up against her, to keep going. I want to hear about the tiny cells, he said, whining as much as he dared. I want to. Not today, she said. Let's just go in. OrganInc Farms. Jimmy's father worked for OrganInc Farms. He was a genographer, one of the best in the field. He'd done some of the key studies on mapping the proteome when he was still a postgrad, and then he'd helped engineer the Methuselah mouse as part of Operation Immortality. After that, at OrganInc Farms, he'd been one of the foremost architects of the Pigoon project, along with a team of transplant experts and the microbiologists who were splicing against infections. Pigoon was only a nickname. The official name was Sus Multiorganifer, but Pigoon was what everyone said. Sometimes they said OrganInc Farms, but not as often. It wasn't really a farm anyway, not like the farms in pictures. The goal of the Pigoon project was to grow an assortment of foolproof human tissue organs in a transgenic knockout pig host. Organs that would transplant smoothly and avoid rejection, but would also be able to fend off attacks of opportunistic microbes and viruses, of which there were more strains every year. A rapid maturity gene was spliced in, so the Pigoon kidneys and livers and hearts would be ready sooner. And now they were perfecting a Pigoon that could grow 5 or 6 kidneys at a time. Such a host animal could be reaped of his extra kidneys then. Rather than being destroyed, it could keep on living and grow more organs, much as a lobster could grow another claw to replace a missing one. That would be less wasteful, as it took a lot of food and care to grow a Pigoon. A great deal of investment money had gone into OrganInc Farms. All of this was explained to Jimmy when he was old enough. Old enough, Snowman thinks as he scratches himself around, but not on top of the insect bites. Such a dumb concept. Old enough for what? To drink, to fuck, to know better? What fathead was in charge of making these decisions? For example, Snowman himself isn't old enough for this, what can it be called? This situation? He'll never be old enough. No sane human could ever be. Each one of us must tread the path laid out before him or her, says the voice in his head. A man's this time, the styled bogus guru, and each path is unique. It's not the nature of the path itself that should concern the seeker, but the grace and strength and patience with which each and every one of us follows the sometimes challenging... Stuff it, says Snowman. Some cheap do-it-yourself enlightenment handbook, nirvana for half-wits. Though he has the nagging feeling that he may well have written this gem himself. In happier days, naturally. Oh, so much happier. The Pigoon organs could be customized using cells from individual human donors, and the organs were frozen until needed. It was much cheaper than getting yourself cloned for spare parts. A few wrinkles left to be ironed out there, as Jimmy's dad used to say, or keeping a four-harvest child or two stashed away in some illegal baby orchard. In the OrganInc brochures and promotional materials, glossy and discreetly worded, stress was laid on the efficacy and comparative health benefits of the Pigoon procedure. Also, to set the queasy at ease, it was claimed that none of the defunct Pigoons ended up as bacon and sausages. No one would want to eat an animal whose cells might be identical with at least some of their own. Still, as time went on and the coastal aquifers turned salty and the northern permafrost melted and the vast tundra bubbled with methane, and the drought in the mid-continental plains regions went on, and the Asian steppes turned to sand dunes, and meat became harder to come by, some people had their doubts. Within OrganInc Farms itself, it was noticeable how often back bacon and ham sandwiches and pork pies turned up on the staff cafe menu. Andre's Bistro was the official name of the cafe, but the regulars called it Grunts. When Jimmy had lunch there with his father, as he did when his mother was feeling harried, the men and women at the nearby tables would make jokes in bad taste. "Pigoon pie again," they would say. "Pigoon pancakes, Pigoon popcorn. Come on, Jimmy, eat up." And this would upset Jimmy. He was confused about who should be allowed to eat what. He didn't want to eat a Pigoon because he thought of the Pigoons as creatures much like himself. Neither he nor they had a lot of say in what was going on. "Don't pay any attention to them, sweetheart," said Ramona. "They're only teasing, you know." Ramona was one of Dad's lab technicians. She often ate lunch with the two of them, him and his dad. She was young, younger than his father and even his mother. She looked something like the picture of the girl in the haircut man's window. She had the same sort of puffed-out mouth and big eyes like that, big and smudgy. But she smiled a lot, and she didn't have her hair in quills. Her hair was soft and dark. Jimmy's mother's hair was what she herself called dirty blonde. "Not dirty enough," said his father. "Hey, joke, don't kill me." Ramona would always have a salad. "How's Sharon doing?" she would say to Jimmy's father, looking at him with her eyes wide and solemn. Sharon was Jimmy's mother. "Not so hot," Jimmy's father would say. "Oh, that's too bad. It's a problem. I'm getting worried." Jimmy watched Ramona eat. She took very small bites and managed to chew up the lettuce without crunching. The raw carrots, too. That was amazing, as if she could liquefy those hard, crisp foods and suck them into herself, like an alien mosquito creature on DVD. Maybe she should, I don't know, see someone. Ramona's eyebrows lifted in concern. She had mauve powder on her eyelids, a little too much. It made them crinkly. "They can do all sorts of things. There's so many new pills." Ramona was supposed to be a tech genius, but she talked like a shower gel babe in an ad. "She wasn't stupid," said Jimmy's dad. "She just didn't want to put her neuron power into long sentences." There were a lot of people like that at OrganInc, and not all of them were women. "It was because they were numbers people, not word people," said Jimmy's father. Jimmy already knew that he himself was not a numbers person. "Don't think I haven't suggested it. I asked around, found the top guy, made the appointment, but she wouldn't go," said Jimmy's father, looking down at the table. "She's got her own ideas." "It's such a shame, a waste. I mean, she was so smart." "Oh, she's still smart enough," said Jimmy's father. "She's got smart coming out of her ears." "But she used to be so, you know." Ramona's fork would slide out of her fingers, and the two of them would stare at each other as if searching for the perfect adjective to describe what Jimmy's mother used to be. Then they'd notice Jimmy listening and beam their attention down on him like extraterrestrial rays. Way too bright. "So, Jimmy, sweetheart, how's it going at school?" "Eat up, old buddy, eat the crust, put some hair on your chest." "Can I go look at the Pigoons?" Jimmy would say. The Pigoons were much bigger and fatter than ordinary pigs, to leave room for all the extra organs. They were kept in special buildings, heavily secured. The kidnapping of a Pigoon and its finely honed genetic material by a rival outfit would have been a disaster. When Jimmy went in to visit the Pigoons, he had to put on a biosuit that was too big for him and wear a face mask and wash his hands first with disinfectant soap. He especially liked the small Pigoons, 12 to a sow, and lined up in a row, guzzling milk, Pigoonlets. They were cute, but the adults were slightly frightening, with their runny noses and tiny white-lashed pink eyes. They glanced up at him as if they saw him, really saw him, and might have plans for him later. Pigoon balloon, he would chant to pacify them, hanging over the edge of the pen. Right after the pens had been washed out, they didn't smell too bad. He was glad he didn't have to live in a pen where he'd have to lie around and poop and pee. The Pigoons had no toilets and did it anywhere. This caused him a vague sensation of shame, but he hadn't wet his bed for a long time, or he didn't think he had. "Don't fall in," said his father. "They'll eat you up in a minute." "No, they won't," said Jimmy. "Because I'm their friend," he thought, "because I sing to them." He wished he had a long stick so he could poke them, not to hurt them, just to make them run around. I spent far too much time doing nothing. When Jimmy was really little, they'd lived in a Cape Cod-style frame house in one of the modules. There were pictures of him in a carry cot on the porch with dates and everything, stuck into a photo album at some time when his mother was still bothering. But now they lived in a large Georgian center plan with an indoor swimming pool and a small gym. The furniture in it was called reproduction. Jimmy was quite old before he realized what this word meant, that for each reproduction item, there was supposed to be an original somewhere, or there had been once, or something. The house, the pool, the furniture all belonged to the OrganInc compound, where the top people lived. Increasingly, the middle-range execs and their junior scientists lived there too. Jimmy's father said it was better that way because nobody had to commute to work from the modules. Despite the sterile transport corridors and the high-speed bullet trains, there was always a risk when you went through the city. Jimmy had never been to the city. He'd only seen it on TV. Endless billboards and neon signs and stretches of buildings, tall and short. Endless dingy-looking streets, countless vehicles of all kinds, some of them with clouds of smoke coming out the back. Thousands of people, hurrying, cheering, rioting. There were other cities, too, near and far. Some had better neighborhoods in them, said his father, almost like the compounds, with high walls around the houses, but those didn't get on TV much. Compound people didn't go to the cities unless they had to, and then never alone. They called the cities the pleblands. Despite the fingerprint identity cards now carried by everyone, public security in the pleblands was leaky. There were people cruising around in those places who could forge anything and who might be anybody, not to mention the loose change, the addicts, the muggers, the paupers, the crazies. So it was best for everyone at OrganInc Farms to live all in one place with foolproof procedures. Outside the OrganInc walls, the gates and searchlights, things were unpredictable. Inside, they were the way it used to be when Jimmy's father was a kid, before things got so serious, or that's what Jimmy's father said. Jimmy's mother said it was all artificial. It was just a theme park that you could never bring the old ways back. But Jimmy's father said, why knock it? You could walk around without fear, couldn't you? Go for a bike ride, sit at a sidewalk cafe, buy an ice cream cone. Jimmy knew his father was right because he himself had done all of these things. Still, the Corsicore men, the ones Jimmy's father called our people, these men had to be on constant alert. When there was so much at stake, there was no telling what the other side might resort to. The other side, or the other sides, it wasn't just one other side that you had to watch out for. Other companies, other countries, various factions and plotters. There was too much hardware around, said Jimmy's father. Too much hardware, too much software, too many hostile bioforms, too many weapons of every kind, and too much envy and fanaticism and bad faith. Long ago, in the days of knights and dragons, the kings and dukes had lived in castles, with high walls and drawbridges and slots in the ramparts, so you could pour hot pitch on your enemies, said Jimmy's father. And the compounds were the same idea. Castles were for keeping you and your buddies nice and safe inside, and for keeping everybody else outside. So are we the kings and dukes? Asked Jimmy. Oh, absolutely, said his father, laughing. Lunch. At one time, Jimmy's mother had worked for OrganInc Farms. That was how his mother had met his father. They both worked at the same compound on the same project. His mother was a microbiologist. It had been her job to study the proteins of the bioforms unhealthy to pigoons, and to modify their receptors in such a way that they could not bond with the receptors on pigoon cells, or else to develop drugs that would act as blockers. It's very simple, she said to Jimmy in one of her explaining moods. The bad microbes and viruses want to get in through the cell doors and eat up the pigoons from the inside. Mummy's job was to make locks for the doors. On her computer screen, she showed Jimmy pictures of the cells, pictures of the microbes getting into the cells and infecting them and bursting them open, close-up pictures of the proteins, pictures of the drugs she had once tested. The pictures looked like the candy bins at the supermarket. A clear plastic bin of round candies, a clear plastic bin of jelly beans, a clear plastic bin of long licorice twizzles. The cells were like the clear plastic bins with the lids that you could lift up. Why aren't you making the locks for the doors anymore? Jimmy said. Because I wanted to stay home with you, she said, looking over the top of Jimmy's head and puffing on her cigarette. What about the pigoons? Said Jimmy, alarmed. The microbes will get into them. He didn't want his animal pals to burst open like the infected cells. Other people are in charge of that now, said his mother. She didn't seem to care at all. She let Jimmy play with the pictures on her computer, and once he learned how to run the programs, he could play war games with them, cells versus microbes. She said it was all right if he lost stuff on the computer because all that material was out of date anyway. Though on some days when she appeared brisk and purposeful and aimed and steady, she would want to fool around on the computer herself. He liked it when she did that, when she seemed to be enjoying herself. She was friendly then, too. She was like a real mother, and he was like a real child. But those moods of hers didn't last long. When had she stopped working at the lab? When Jimmy started at the OrganInc school full-time in the first grade? Which didn't make sense, because if she'd wanted to stay home with Jimmy, why had she started doing that when Jimmy stopped being at home? Jimmy could never figure out the reasons, and when he'd first heard this explanation, he'd been too young to even think about them. All he'd known was that Dolores, the live-in from the Philippines, had been sent away, and he'd missed her a lot. She called him Jim Jim and had smiled and laughed and cooked his egg just the way he liked it and had sung songs and indulged him. But Dolores had to go now because Jimmy's real mummy would be there all the time. This was held out to him like a treat, and nobody needed two mummies, did they? Oh, yes, they did, thinks Snowman. Oh, yes, they really did. Snowman has a clear image of his mother, of Jimmy's mother, sitting at the kitchen table, still in her bathrobe when he came home from school for his lunch. She would have a cup of coffee in front of her untouched, and she'd be looking out the window and smoking. Her bathrobe was magenta, a color that still makes him anxious whenever he sees it. As a rule, there would be no lunch ready for him, and he'd have to make it himself, his mother's only participation being to issue directions in a flat voice. The milk's in the fridge. To the right. No, the right. Don't you know which hand is your right? She sounded so tired. Maybe she was tired of him. Or maybe she was sick. Are you infected? He asked her one day. What do you mean, Jimmy? Like the cells. Oh, I see. No, I'm not, she said. And then after a moment, maybe I am. But when his face crumpled, she took it back. More than anything, Jimmy had wanted to make her laugh, to make her happy, as he seemed to remember her being once. He would tell her funny things that had happened at school, or things he tried to make funny, or things he simply invented. Carrie Johnston would poo on the floor. He would caper around the room, crossing his eyes and cheeping like a monkey, a trick that worked with several of the little girls in his class and almost all of the boys. He would put peanut butter on his nose and try to lick it off with his tongue. Most of these times, these activities just irritated his mother. That's not amusing. That's disgusting. Stop it, Jimmy. You're giving me a headache. But then He might get a smile out of her, or more. He never knew what would work. Once in a while, there'd be a real lunch waiting for him, a lunch that was so arranged and extravagant it frightened him. For what was the occasion? Place setting, paper napkin, colored paper napkin, like parties. The sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, his preferred combo, only it would be open face and round, a peanut butter head with a jelly smiley face. His mother would be carefully dressed, her lipstick smile an echo of the jelly smile on the sandwich, and she would be all sparkling attention for him and his silly stories, looking at him directly, her eyes bluer than blue. What she reminded him of at such times was a porcelain sink, clean, shining hard. He knew he was expected to appreciate all the effort she had put into his lunch, and so he too made an effort. "Oh boy, my favorite," he would say, rolling his eyes, rubbing his stomach in a caricature of hunger, overdoing it. But he'd get what he wanted because she would laugh. As he grew older and more devious, he found out that on days when he couldn't grab some approval, he could at least get a reaction. Anything was better than the flat voice, the blank eyes, the tired staring out of the window. "Can I have a cat?" he would begin. "No, Jimmy, you cannot have a cat. We've been over this before. Cats might carry diseases that would be bad for the pigoons. But you don't care." This in a sly voice. A sigh, a puff of smoke. "Other people care. Can I have a dog then?" "No, no dogs either. Can't you find something to do in your room?" "Can I have a parrot?" "No, now stop it." She wouldn't really be listening. "Can I have nothing?" "No." "Oh, good," he would crow. "I can't have nothing, so I get to have something. What do I get to have?" "Jimmy, sometimes you're a pain in the ass. Do you know that?" "Can I have a baby sister?" "No." "A baby brother, then, please?" "No means no. Didn't you hear me? I said no." "Why not?" And that was the key. That would do it. She might start crying and jump up and run out of the room, banging the door behind her. Woof. Or else she might start crying and hugging him. Or she might throw the coffee cup across the room and start yelling, "It's all shit. It's total shit. It's hopeless." She might even slap him and then cry and hug him. It could be any combination of those things. Or it would just be the crying. With her head down on her arms, she'd shake all over and gasp for breath, choking and sobbing, and he wouldn't know what to do then. He loved her so much when he made her unhappy, or else when she made him unhappy. At these moments he scarcely knew which was which. He would pat her, standing well back as with strange dogs, stretching out his hand saying, I'm sorry. And he was sorry, but there was more to it. He was also gloating, congratulating himself because he'd managed to create such an effect. He was frightened as well. There was always that knife edge. Had he gone too far? And if he had, what came next?